Okay. Probably already know Ross, anyone who's on Twitter already. For those of you that don't, he's worth a follow. And for those that don't, Ross is an army doctor, British Army doctor, who's highly experienced in emergency medicine, pre-hospital care and retrieval. Over the years, he's deployed to various conflict zones, has worked at some of the UK's major trauma centres and is now based at the Emergency Department in Glasgow, where he also flies with the Scottish Air Ambulance. We all make occasional mistakes in our practice, and these can be hard to deal with. Ross is here to look at why errors happen, how we can avoid them, and how we can turn things to advantage when they do. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to start with, obviously, the first mistake, which everyone seems to think was that shirt, but I massively disagree. I'm a big fond of it. So apart from sartorial tips, which I haven't really got for you, why am I here? I'm here because I think it's something that I've noticed over the years is that the more senior you get in medicine, it lets people talk about mistakes, and there's a feeling that mistakes are something that shouldn't or couldn't happen. And I think that's probably wrong. I think mistakes are slightly inevitable in what we do because it is a messy human process. So I came up here to talk a little bit about some of the reasons that mistakes happen, some of the reasons we can avoid them, but more importantly to talk about what happens when you do make a mistake and how you pick yourself up, dust yourself off and get on with it, because I'm pretty sure if you look around the room, there is a saying that the only doctors who don't make mistakes are retired, because they're the ones who come up and give expert witness statements against you. So I'm going to start, I'm going to put myself on the line and talk to you about a mistake what I have made. So, I was junior intensive care registrar in the northeast of England, and we'd anaesthetised a patient who'd come in to ED with a head injury. And I was feeling quite good about myself, feeling quite heroic. I'd come down to the department, saved the day, patient was tubed, I was going to take him off to CT scan, and I was feeling I'd done a good job there. So here I am, looking very heroic. And then there was a problem. Just before we went to CT, I had a look at the monitor. And I found out just how high the systolic blood pressure reading on that monitor goes. The top of the scale was 300, and I was over it. And I wasn't really sure what the hell was going on. So I had a little look back, and then I suddenly realised that the flush that I thought was flush was not flush. It was metaraminol. And I'd just given the patient a 3 milligram bolus of metaraminol, which is quite a lot. So I wasn't feeling great about myself, to be honest. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was kind of thinking, this is not good. So, did it happen? I mean, this happened because I'm a fool. But did that flush happen because I'm a fool? I would like to hope you'll bear with me on this and say that it did not. So, thoughts about why. I mean, I spent a long time reflecting on why it happened. And obviously did the usual bits of rang my boss, confessed all, and she was thrilled to be woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning by a slightly hysterical registrar going, oh God, I've got it really wrong. However, managed the hypertension medically, CT scanned the patient, and when they woke up, we told them about it, and actually all's well as ends well. So as mistakes go, there's definitely could have gone worse. But I spent a long time thinking about why it happened. And as always with these things, it's multifactorial. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I was tired. I was hungry. I was out of my normal environment. I was working in a resus room that I wasn't familiar with. I didn't have an assistant with me, so I was working with ED nurses who I'd never worked with before. And also, when I looked at it very hard, I didn't have critical care drug labels. So I showed you the metaraminol label earlier on. What I was working with at the time was a 20ml syringe with a tatty bit of paper with things written on it. And if anyone's tried to do that, picking up one 20ml syringe pretty much looks the same as any other 20ml syringe. So lots and lots of factors happened to produce the problem. And as a result, I've always kind of felt that that was the first time in my independent or semi-independent practice I really felt I'd made a proper cock-up. And it kind of lived with me, and it's still with me now, as an example of how to feel. So now that I work in ED, some numbers for you. These are slightly dubious, as in the sources to these I'm not convinced about, but they're chucked around the internet as things to say that roughly an ED doctor has approximately 800 individual tasks per shift, and makes roughly 35,000 decisions a day. Now, I don't want to get too into the methodology of that, because like I say, I think it's a bit dubious. But for the sake of argument, can I ask you to accept those numbers? Because the point I'm making is that even if we say that our error rate is less than 1%, that still suggests that we're making a fair number of wrong decisions every single day. Now, probably most of those are trivial. You know, do I take the long way round or the short way round from Resus? Do I have Weetabix or cornflakes for my breakfast? Well, maybe not a right and a wrong to that one, but you get where I'm coming from. Most of these decisions are trivial and meaningless, but we nonetheless, making mistakes is what we will do every day as part of just where we work. The other thing I'd like to think about is, as emergency and a pre-hospital person, the patient's on a journey, and that journey moves through time and space, very Doctor Who for a second, and my position is usually pretty early on that. So you can see I'm way over to the left, where time is short, don't have very much of it, and I don't have very much information. And as time goes on, more information, more time is available and more information is available. And as a result, it's really easy to be super clever 2 days down the road on ITU when you've got all the scans perfectly done, you've had 2 days of observation for the patient. In fact, this happened to me. I was doing a retrieval yesterday from the Western Isles, and it was really obvious to me that the patient I'd been given as a very undifferentiated sick patient actually wasn't that undifferentiated, but it took several hours of observation, tests, results to really get a feel for that. And as you can see, the curve goes on to the right, and it leads right up the way to the inquest, where it's obviously very, very easy to be super clever when you're stood in your suit in the coroner's court and you've got all the facts in front of you and you've had 2 days to go through them and produce your beautifully written expert witness statement. So 2 things I think that I take from this. First of all, we're on that journey at different places on that journey, and you should only really judge people with what they knew at that point on the journey. And if a mistake happens earlier on the journey, probably just need to accept that you should not judge it with what you knew at the far right of the curve. You should judge it with what that person knew then and there. And all of a sudden that unlocks the need to be just a little bit more understanding about where things come from. The other thing that I would take from this, and this is something I bring into my practice all the time, is that better is the enemy of good enough, and that if you hang on waiting for all that information, you'll be waiting for the inquest 6 months later. So sometimes you simply have to act. So, when we're talking about diagnostic errors, I think they generally fall into 2 big, broad brush categories. It's either a knowledge deficit or it's a cognitive error. You either don't know enough or you have processed the data that you have incorrectly. Studies are a bit variable on this, but there is a suggestion that it may be over 90% of these are cognitive error. Now, those are methodologically a bit problematic. I think there's probably an underestimate there, because I think knowledge drives your cognition. I think if your knowledge is extensive, it's easier to make the cognitive links together. And especially, that's something I've noticed as I get older. I probably know less than I did as a registrar, but I'm just better at linking things together because that's what experience gives you. So, anyway, we'll talk about why cognitive errors happen. And I think they come into sort of 4 sectors. And I think it's important to sort of stop and realise that cognitive biases exist for a reason. We have evolved. Well, it was really interesting hearing you talk about great apes, because we are basically slightly less hairy, or some of us slightly less hairy great apes. So we've evolved a brain that works in a certain way. And it works that way for a reason. So people talk about cognitive biases like they're bad things, but they're not. They're part of being human. And that's probably one of the things we need to stop and understand, that we're not bad because we've got biases. We're biases because of who we are. And what do biases do? They allow us to filter out what's important. They allow us to add meaning to meaningless data, because none of us are very good at looking at spreadsheets. They allow us to speed up our decision making, and they allow us to use our memory to then guide future events. So the first thing we do is we filter our input. And the way I think about this, we notice what we're primed to notice. And the best example I can think of this, My children are getting a bit older now, but if anyone's ever been for a walk with a 2-year-old, if anyone's ever tried to walk down the street with a 2-year-old, it's the most maddening thing in the world because they want to look at everything. Because a 2-year-old doesn't filter. Everything's exciting because everything's new and everything's fresh, but as a result, you're stood there going, can we just get on with it? So we have to filter. But that means that we only notice that which gets through our filters. We notice that which we're primed to notice. And things like confirmation bias come out of that. It also means that we know our preconceptions and we like them. We've all got our preconceptions about who's good, who's bad, people that look like us, that sound like us, that talk like us. We like them. We're primed to like them. That's the nature of humanity. But you need to be conscious of that when you're assessing, do I not like this person because they smell bad, because they've been living in a shop doorway, or do I not like this person because they're a bad person? So being aware of your biases, and being aware of those filters. The next thing we do with data is we have to give it meaning. Okay? We're awful at probability. We simplify maths because we can't do it. Our brains exist to try and to turn this big spreadsheet of information and turn it into a useful, meaningful bit of data. So we look for patterns that aren't there. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's one of the reasons why we get diagnostic errors. We talked about liking people that look and sound like us. We simplify, we're terrible at probability. And we tend to focus on what's real and in front of us rather than abstract, which is why you're much keener to do the CT scan now, because the risk of missing a significant diagnosis rather than worrying about the leukemia that's going to happen 25 years later, because that's not your problem, it's not the problem that's in front of us. And it's quite hard to learn to play those risks against one another. The other thing that meaning is interesting is that we think other people care as much about us as we do. It drives a lot of the ego-driven decision-making. We think that everyone's looking at us and judging us. They're not. They don't care. Most people don't. So we get very egotistical because we think that other people are as interested in our lives and our egos as we are, and they're not. So it's easier to be humble when you realise that nobody cares. Time flies, so seize the day. We speed up decision-making. Our biases help us do that. Okay? Our cognitive shortcuts help that. And that's good because it can make faster, but also be aware of the errors that can happen when we're making rapid decisions, and particularly when we're less knowledgeable. We'll talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect and all that. Okay. A very posh way of saying, remember that there's also a big difference between human memory is a really odd thing. And if you ask a historian, you say one of the most maddening things about doing history, particularly military history, a really, really fascinating chapter in a military historian said, one of the most maddening things in the world is trying to interview two people who fought in the same battle, because they will give you totally different stories. And they're both right, because they both are, it's the remembering self, which is different from the experiencing self. And the remembering self, and this is fascinating psychology, I'll not go into it too deep. But the best way to think about this is think about your own high school days. And everyone remembers things really, really clearly from that golden era. Well, I didn't, I hated high school, but people remember things. We remember things that show us in a good light. And it's not lying. And that, as a result, people's memories of events written down afterwards are often not quite, that's why courts struggle with human testimony, because it's very moving to juries, but it's not objective, and it's often, people will tell you things that are completely at odds with what the CCTV showed. And they're not lying, it's just how their memory has been produced of it. Okay. So, we don't like noise. So the noise, we turn it into signal. We like to fill in the gaps in that signal, and we make stories. And we use those stories to make conclusions. And then we build mental models based on that. So what? Thinking about how we think means that we're open to understanding where it can go wrong. And I'll go through a few examples. What's the most commonly missed injury in an X-ray? It's a trick question. The answer is the second injury. Okay? If you look carefully, that is Monteggia's fracture dislocation. You can see the ulnar fracture. But if you're not looking for it, you'll miss that the radial head's dislocated. It's easy to spot, to fix on one thing. So we call that search satisfaction. Once you've found something that fits, people tend to stop looking. So just being aware of that, being systematic about how you assess data. Anyone know who this guy is, or was? Dominique Larrey, father of triage, one of Napoleon's chief surgeons. The point about that is about geography being destiny, that assuming that because a patient's triaged to a certain way, that's what they are. So they come with a label. Just because they walked in off the street, they get triaged to sit in the waiting room, there can't really be anything too wrong with them. Or because they've come in by ambulance, they must be sick. Not quite true. So don't fall into the trap of assumptions. Talked a little bit about this, the gambler's ruin. the fallacy that dice have memory, and that just because the last 10 patients who walked into your triage room with back pain were musculoskeletal and just needed to go away and take some Brufen, that doesn't change the base rate fallacy. And again, we talked about why humans are terrible at assessing probability. You know, just because the last 10 back pains just needed a bit of pain relief and a bit of reassurance doesn't mean that the one that's coming in is not a cauda syndrome. So being aware of the base rate of things happening in the population is really important. Similarly, things like headaches presenting to ED versus headaches presenting in primary care. Understanding the rates at which pathology occurs is important. Fundamental attribution error. Anyone tried the local tonic while they're up here? Don't, it's revolting. The bloke stumbling around the ED with a bottle of this stuff sticking out his pocket, it's very easy to say, oh God, he's just a drunk, I'll just hoof him out. He might be a drunk or he might not. So again, one of the things I've had to learn the hard way is that fundamentally, you know, assuming that because something fits a certain pattern, it must be a certain way is not true. Okay? The drunk head injury is a cliche in emergency medicine for a reason. The badge of a Royal Navy leading hand, anchoring. Okay? It's easy to grab hold of a salient fact and let it blind you to what else is going on. To me, the biggest risk for that is when you're doing two rapid assessments in triage. When the patient comes, you know, the triage nurse says, oh, Ross, this patient's come in, they've had abdominal pain for 3 years. Could you just come in and tell them and just hoof them out? And you go all fired in, ready to give them a lecture. And then suddenly you realise you're going to have to do a pretty rapid regain because actually the patient's got worse pain and vomiting and they've obstructed. This has happened to me more times than I care to recall. So just being aware and not letting the preconceptions of somebody else, don't anchor on the first bit of data that makes sense. Go with it. So, rapid gallop through why some of the things that we can do about mistakes. But then we come to the crunch. What happens when it actually happens to you? And you're the one going, oh, shit. Okay? Because everyone thinks it's not going to happen until the time it does. All right, first things first. Don't panic. Okay? Mistakes become fuck-ups, sorry about my language, but that's important, or cover-ups when people panic. So the first thing is, again, to use the local parlance, keep the heat and work the problem. Make it safe. Okay? So work out what you need to do immediately to make the situation safe. Does the patient need any treatment right now? If you've given someone with an anaphylactic reaction to antibiotic, to penicillin, then antihistamine, steroids, all that sort of stuff. The other thing to think about in terms of safety is your own psychological safety. Okay, I'll talk about that in a minute. But honesty, all right? You have to be honest at this point with yourself and with everybody, with the team and with your patient, because most patients are actually very accepting of error. You know, every time I've gone to a patient and said, this has gone wrong and I'm really sorry, patients actually take that very well, as long as you approach them with honesty and humility. But where I've seen it go terribly, terribly, terribly wrong is when people try to conceal things and it comes out later on, because it always does. Okay? Cover-ups and dishonesty are not forgivable. Okay? So in terms of your psychological safety, find your Obi-Wan Kenobi. All right? Find a trusted mentor that you can sit and go through it with. Okay? I've got a list on my phone of 3 or 4 people who are the people I will ring when I've cock up. And because they're people I know and trust and who are long enough in the tooth to understand where I'm coming from and will give me the psychological safety I need to go on forward. Okay, talked about cover-ups. Okay. And then we'll think about investigations, all right? This hopefully is relatively familiar. This is quite well known. So it's looking at where root cause analysis, looking at where in the problem, the Swiss cheese, it all fell through. And the answer is there will be several, okay? Mistakes do not happen individually. I mean, we talked about that, the metanominal thing. It was a combination of factors that led to it. So we need to come up with a combination of reasons why. We should always report them, all right? And I know the DATEX system is a nose. And I know it feels like you're just pushing information into the ether and it never comes back to you. I've pinched this from the Military Aviation Authority's accident, because I don't like, people pinch a lot of aviation stuff and stick it in medicine, but I think sometimes they've got a really good point, and this is one of those points. They reckon that for every accident, there are 13 near misses and 300 unreported occurrences. So if we report these things and we produce the data set about why they're happening, then people can look for patterns. And patterns are important because we can't affect change. And I'm speaking with my, in a sort of service point of view. I can't change the service. I can't go and ask for more money, for more staffing, for better real estate without data. So I need the information. So I need people to report when things happen. And it feels embarrassing. You don't want to, but you must, because I can't affect change without it. Talking about culpability. I don't expect you to read this. the important thing to realise is that when we're talking about why apportioning blame, it's not as simple as you screwed up, you're a bad person, I'll give you a slap. You have to look at what actually happened. So the question is, was there a total disregard for the consequences? Generally not, I would say. Sometimes, but it's pretty unusual. And otherwise, were the rules intentionally broken? Okay? And were they broken for a reason? And was that reason because the rules didn't fit the situation, or was it because the person was in a hurry to get off early? You know, rule breaking happens for all sorts of reasons, and we need to pin down exactly why, because if the rules are wrong, we need to change the rules. Or if the action was unintended, was it a mistake, as in you did the wrong thing? Or was it an error, as in you did the wrong thing, you did the right thing at the wrong time? And again, trying to work that out and trying to really drill down into why the problem happened, but also what was the intention. And we end up with this idea that there's a sliding scale of culpability from the out-and-out sabotage at the far right to just the not understanding, the error, the knowledge-based problem on the left. Okay? And I would say most medical problems come into the errors and mistakes, but sometimes they come further right, and we need to be honest about that. And if the error was happening, if it was a violation, if we were bending the rules for a reason, then there's a problem with our system, and we need to change our system. So, managing knowledge-based, knowledge errors. All right, we hit the books. Okay, we get out there and we study, but we work out what we needed to know. Okay, it's my son reading Private Eye because he's a precocious little sod. Okay, was it a skills error? Do we need to do mentor practice? Do we need to get someone to take us through the skill slowly and carefully so that we can learn it in a safe and supervised way, so that then when we fly again, it will be easier? Was it a cognitive error? All right? I've definitely been the guy on the right. This is the point where your mentor helps, okay? Unpack what you were thinking. Go through the decision making and remember to think about what you knew and what you were thinking at the time. It's no good going through it all with the benefit of hindsight. It's so easy to be clever then. The time to go through it slowly is to think, what were you thinking at the time? What was your impression? What was your mental model of what was happening with that patient? And how did it work it through? And remembering, like I say, this is why you need someone who you can trust, because it's very easy in after effect. Think about yourself, all right? What other factors were involved? I mean, we talk about the hungry, angry, late, tired, but there's so many more things that can affect decision making. Stress, tiredness, noise, vibration, fear. They all tie up cognitive processing power. So, you need to be honest about what else was going on at the time, all right? What else is happening in your life that makes it challenging? Was it a system problem? All right? And was it an internal system problem that you can fix, or was it an external system problem that you need to engage? And this is where we get to those violations. Did the rules not make sense, or did the rules not apply, and do we need new rules? What factors can we change? Okay. So, it's a slightly depressing talking about mistakes, isn't it? No one likes it, but we can make it better, all right? Because failure is a really good teacher, okay? We all hate failure. We all hate the idea of getting it wrong, but we just have to take a step over that, park our egos and understand that we can still learn a lot from our mistakes as long as we approach them with humility and we take a positive relationship. We see them as ways we can get better. Right? And also, we're kind to one another. I'm going to have a punt and see if I can make a video work. All right, so I'm just going to give you an idea of a fixation error. Can we see if we try and play it? Should work. It's an embedded. My children are going to kill me. However, that's where they are now, okay? So, Frick went from skiing into lampposts to skiing black runs, okay? And he's learned. So, I think the important thing about mistakes is you need to be brave about them. You need to be humble. You need to be honest, and but still be proud of who you are and what you've done. I will stop there. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I think I've left time for questions if there are any.
Brilliant, right? Brilliant, Ross. Thought-provoking and hugely honest, and so thank you for sharing. Any questions in the room? There's one on the side there.
Do you want if you use the mic so that everyone can hear?
Yeah, because the people at home can't hear without the mic. Thank you.
Hello?
Hello.
Okay. What do you think about the integration of AI to help eliminate some personal human errors?
In theory, yes. I think I think AI has probably still got a bit to go before it's going to be useful for everything, but there's definitely areas where I think it could be really helpful. I know that in certain places like critical care units, they're using AI to analyse patterns in patients on continuous monitoring over time to try and produce, spot things happening before they go. So in theory, I'm for it. I think we've got to be careful about making sure that the AI is right for the tool, the job that we're asking it to do. So I think it's got a lot of potential to help us. I just think it's not quite there, but there's definitely areas where in the next few years, I think, certainly by the time I retire, I'm kind of hoping that it will be able to reduce my cognitive load. And basically, I'm for anything that reduces cognitive load. So checklists, little aid memoirs. I do this when I'm training people. I say, real life is not a memory test. So if you just can't remember the sequences, the steps of a procedure, have it written on a little crib card, and just use it. Because there's no reason you have to remember everything.
Couple at the back.
The actual framework within which you work, the policies, procedures and so on, must be quite important, because if you're going to be honest, then you want to know that that will be received properly.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. I mean, you need it takes quite a lot of organisational cultural work to make sure that everyone is content with that. Again, the way that we manage this in the military is that our debriefs happen as a team first internally. So we get together as a team, work out what we did well, what we need to improve on, and that's in a much safer location. And then before we take that into a wider sort of clinical governance meeting, so we've got our bit of it straight. And then you take it out there. But again, it requires everybody involved in the process to understand where the individual clinicians are coming from, and particularly the important thing about remembering that curve and remembering that you can only judge people on what they knew at the time rather than with the perfection of hindsight. We all get very frightened about lawyers, but even lawyers get this. The inquest of the Clapham rail disaster was quite a really useful line about this, that there is no action in human endeavour that cannot be made to look stupid with the benefit of hindsight. And I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this stuff.
Thank you for a very good talk. If you look at analysing problems in terms of systems, one of the problems we have in primary care is that a problem usually has a system and a sequence of errors which involve people at different stages of the patient's care.
Yep.
And one of the things we find inversely is that the higher you are in that sequence, the easier it is for you to admit to the mistake. So it's quite easy for doctors to just turn around and say, I got this wrong.
Yep.
But the people who find it really stigmatizing to admit to mistakes are people lower down in that pecking order, so admin, reception, and some of the nursing staff. And it becomes a real problem for us, is saying, how do we, when we're saying it's okay to admit to a problem, how do we destigmatize analysing significant events in such a way that we're not aiming at the individual, but what we're saying is we're looking at the system and how to improve it?
Yeah. Good question. I think if I knew it, I probably wouldn't be stood here. I'd be getting paid a lot more money to do something else. It's really challenging. There's certainly the way that we run our things. We run them multidisciplinary, and our clinical governance is multidisciplinary. So the doctors, the paramedics, the retrieval practitioners are all together, but we all understand the common system that we work to. I think there are other areas within medicine that have a lot of cultural work to do to get their heads around, move themselves into this space. And I think some of my nursing colleagues would say that they feel much more closely scrutinised by this and not really and judged unfairly in hindsight. I don't have the solution to that. I wish I did, but I think stuff like this, where we're sat here talking about it, an old guy with a bit of grey in his hair stood up at the front talking about this, I think is a step along the way. And I think if everyone takes that away into their own systems, then hopefully we'll effect some change together.
Do you anonymise evidence?
At clinical governance? No. We talk about things a bit more. We talk about things openly. When you're taking it into wider lessons learned, then yes, you probably should do that. But within our own organisation, we don't. We keep it. It's important to know exactly what was going on.
Any questions online, Emma?
Yes, further to that, we have two similar questions from Simon and Alethea. how do you think we can best help junior doctors and trainees when they're involved in error or mistake?
I think by being the Obi-Wan Kenobi, that's our, I think that's our job as the older people, to be not to be afraid to share our own mistakes and let people see that we are as human as they are, and that just because I'm older and better paid, that just lets me make more expensive mistakes. So we have to be honest about that, and be seen to be engaging with the processes rather than just sweeping it all under the carpet because it was the consultants that did it.
Leading from the front. Excellent.
I think there is one more, but can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How would you reflect on potential differences between the sort of formal hospital or primary care environment to the extreme environment where people are making decisions that reach remotely with limited resource, and the difference in sort of blame culture between the two?
Yeah, I don't know. I think so much of it depends on individual organisations, but I think actually there's almost a danger, I think, in the austere setting to almost be a bit too understanding. I think you still have to be, sensible about, going through things reasonably, robustly and openly. And certainly there is a sort of tendency slightly to say, oh, it was a difficult situation. And yes, it was, but that you still can learn lessons from difficult situations. I think there's that whole fair blame thing we were talking about understanding what an individual is to be said to be culpable for, and what a system needs to be taking responsibility for. So that's one of the things I think we found in the austere setting, is that you can almost just brush things over, and you mustn't. You should still look to learn those lessons and hold people fairly to account, but to understand what you can gain from, rather than just bollocking people, saying, right, what's the knowledge that we need to give you, what's the skills practice we need to give you, what's the cognitive processing we need to teach you to do better the next time. So I think the fundamentals are still the same, and I just think it's almost more important in the austere setting to be really robust about how we do it. But with people who are doing it, understanding that the analysis being done by people who understand the environment and can judge things fairly.
You want your extreme Obi-Wan Kenobi. The other one at the back there. Thank you.
Thanks for a great talk. I guess you've been able to compare and contrast two cultures, the NHS and the military. Mm-hmm. Are there things that each can learn from the other? Always.
I think it's probably less about individual bits within, because the military is such a big beast. I think it would be just wrong to say that there's just one thing that's good. But I think that's one of the real advantages of the way that I work. I work half a foot in each camp, and we can pinch bits from each, and I do that with gay abandon. And it is quite important to not assume that your system is the best, and to look at what you can take from others. So that does work, and I agree.
There's another one around the back row.
I was just wondering about your thoughts about the no-blame culture that we operate in the NHS.
I think I'm not a big fan of the no-blame culture. I think no-blame culture is probably the wrong way to look at it. I think it needs to be fair, but it must be fair. And I think you're right. There is definitely bits of the NHS where fair is not what you get. And I think it would be nice to see, we talk a good game about this, and there are certain organisations that do this well, and I think it's predominantly pre-hospital organisations tend to have a sort of fairer analysis bit of this. But I suppose what's going to be interesting in the NHS over the next couple of years is how we manage, I suspect most people have seen the letter that was put around from our Lords and Masters saying that it's all going to be okay and we'll be judged fairly. I'll confess myself sceptical, but we'll see. But yes, you're absolutely right. We're not there yet, and we do need to do better.
Brilliant. And just to keep you fit, sorry, there's one right down the front now. If the next question can be on the back row as well, because she's loving the exercise.
It's free fizz.
So I've never heard of the no blame. I'm an American-based paramedic, but I have heard of no shame. Mm-hmm. I think people do need to take responsibility for their actions, but because medical personnel have a tendency to eat their own, mm-hmm. I think that propensity, or that increases the propensity to not report. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to know your thoughts, not on no blaming, but on no shaming.
Do you know what? What I'm going to do is write that down and steal it, because I really like it.
I feel like Brene Brown, our Lord and Savior, is coming through the mic right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think you're right. It's not no. I don't like it when people say no blame, because I think that's wrong. People, it's fair, and the system's got to be fair and got to be seen to be fair. But you're right. It's more important that instead of looking for, when people are held accountable, we don't say you're a bad person, because we always have to start from the perspective that everyone gets up in the morning, has a cup of coffee and goes out to do the best job that they can do. So if things go wrong, it's not because people chose them to go wrong, it's because something happened and we need to educate or support or get them through it rather than pointing fingers, because it feels good, doesn't it? That righteous indignation feels right, but it's counterproductive. You just end up breaking your people, and nobody learns, and we don't report things, and nothing gets better.
Brilliant. Thank you. Any final questions? In that case, thanks again, Ross. Hugely thought-provoking. Lots to reflect on. Thank you.